Okay, good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome you to the Leadership Winston-Salem Leader and Lunch webinar today. We have a great group of people who have been assembled who are going to chat with you about equity and wealth. I'd like to thank specifically Parsec Financial for their sponsorship of this webinar today, as well as their time and energy spent in helping to plan. They've been great partners to us, and we would like to thank them for their collaborative efforts. At this time, I would like to introduce you to our moderator today, Judson Meinhart, as a certified financial planner, practitioner, and behavioral financial advisor. He holds a Master of Business Administration degree from, oh heavens, Coltstown?
Kutztown, close enough.
Yes, a university in Pennsylvania of great acclaim, and a bachelor's degree from the University of Delaware, and is the author of the recently published book, Golfer's Guide to Money. Judd lives in Clemens, North Carolina with his wife and their 2 young sons. He enjoys running, golfing, and claiming a prestigious spot in the class of 2020 for Leadership Winston-Salem. Judd?
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. You're forgiven for your Southern pronunciation of Kutztown. Welcome, everybody. I appreciate you all tuning in over your lunch breaks today to join us and hear a little bit more about a topic that really hits home for me. A lot of you know me as a financial advisor, but what you might not know is that I started out my career in the nonprofit sector, where I spent more than a decade in youth services. And more specifically, I worked a lot with juvenile justice involved youth or youth who are caught up in the court system. One of the more formidable projects that I was a part of was a task force that was established to examine the root issues of disproportionate minority contact these youth had with law enforcement. And what's sitting at that table alongside legislators, mayors, city council members, law enforcement officers, and even, stakeholders in the community and the private sector, what it really taught me was that it truly takes a community to address systemic issues that create inequality. So I'm excited that we have a real powerhouse of group of individuals, 3 women no less, who are making their dent in the universe and addressing the systemic issues that create inequality and wealth for different genders, races, and ethnicities right here in our community. But before we do that, we're going to test your knowledge with a few questions. So put aside your lunch, put down the Jimmy John's, grab a napkin, and get ready for a few poll questions here. So first up, historically, home ownership has been a primary driver of wealth. However, the lasting impact of systemic racism has denied a disproportionate number of Black Americans this opportunity. As of 2020, 74% of white households owned their homes, while what percentage of Black households owned theirs? Again, what percentage of Black households own their own homes? We'll give you about 15 to 20 seconds to register your vote. Answer. And whenever the pace slows a little bit, Jared, you can show us what that answer is. All right. Pretty good. Yes, that's correct. 44% of Black households own their own home. So you can see a 30-point percentage gap, between white households and Black households. And this is despite the Fair Housing Act of 1968, I believe it is. A lot of the progress that was made in the past few decades was actually wiped out by some of the predatory lending practices that led to the great financial crisis in 2008. So a lot of room, a lot of improvement to be done there. Let's queue up the second poll question to introduce the TIAA Institute and the Global Financial Literacy Center partner on something that they call the PFIN Index. This measures financial literacy among U.S. adults. It's a 28-question survey testing respondents' proficiency on topics like borrowing, saving, and risk-taking. So with regards to financial literacy, what percentage of questions do you think the average U.S. adult answered correctly on this survey? 42%, 50%, 63%, or 75%? So you can already see in the topic of financial literacy, there are no A's and B's here. There's a lot of average or below. And again, we'll give you 15, 20 seconds. All right, and results. I think we have a theme here. Everybody is going low. So the correct answer to this poll is 50%. So the average U.S. adult on a 28-question survey about financial literacy or personal finance topics answers about half of them correct. That also means they answer about half of them wrong. And our final question has to do with the topic of, sorry, I'm pulling my questions up here, has to do with the topic of gender and equity, technical difficulties.
Judd, do you want me to
Go
read
for it if you have it in front of you. I lost it.
Okay. Americans have long prided themselves on the ability to move up the income ladder, but there are signs the U.S. economic mobility is disappearing, especially for certain populations. Since 1960, the median wealth of white households has tripled, while the wealth of Black households has barely increased. One reason for this is Black Americans' underrepresentation in high-paying professions like corporate leadership. As of 2020, how many of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies were Black? I'll let you take it over, Judd.
Thank you. Again. All right, a little more split on this one. Astonishingly, only 4 of the Fortune 500 companies in 2020 had a Black CEO. That is despite Blacks making up approximately 18% of the United States population. So you can see very disproportionately represented at some of the higher echelons of corporate America. So, all right. So I think everybody did pretty well there. A little bit better than maybe what was expected. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists here, and we're going to open up with some Q&A. So Phyllis Caldwell-George, who is a fellow Leadership Winston-Salem 2009 alumna. She's the president and CEO of Financial Pathways of the Piedmont, which is a local nonprofit that helps people regardless of age, race, or income build financial well-being. She brings over 22 years of nonprofit management experience to her role as the head of this organization. And prior to becoming the president and CEO, she oversaw the agency's financial management and debt counseling and housing programs, as well as the Center for Home Ownership, which is a one-stop housing counseling center. Our second panelist is Tiffany Grant, who is a self-proclaimed money nerd, and she is proud of it. She is the founder of Money Talk with Tiff, which includes a website, blog, podcast, Instagram, all focused on getting followers motivated for their financial journey. She is a Greensboro-based financial coach, public speaker, and instructor on personal finance for individuals, and she also offers financial wellness services for corporations. And last but not least is Harli Palme, who was my savior about 30 seconds ago. She is the president and CEO and CCO of Parsec Financial Wealth Management, which has firms throughout our offices throughout North Carolina, including one office here in Winston-Salem. Harli joined Parsec in 2003, and she is a CFA charter holder as well as a certified financial practitioner. As part of her role, Harli also oversees the firm's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and was an instrumental part in the recent launch of the Parsec Financial CFP Certification Diversity Scholarship, which is administered by the CFP Board. She also has a Bachelor of Arts in English and Religion from Wake Forest University, a name that's much more familiar than Kutztown. And she currently serves on the board of directors of On Track Financial Education and Counseling. So we're going to kick this off with a question for you, Phyllis, that has to do with housing. So it seems that housing is at the root of a lot of things that impact the racial wealth gap or hold others back from wealth equity. How do we level that playing field, and what barriers do you see in your work that face Black households?
Thanks, Judson, for the great question. And first of all, I'm excited to be here, and I am welcoming all the participants that have joined in the webinar today. I think that there are a number of reasons why we have the racial wealth gap. Though, you know, its size has varied over time, it's not consistently shrinking. And largely in part, you know, the wealth gap is driven in part by the large differences in access to home ownership. And because one, you know, wealth is intergenerational, and the main mechanism in the US to generate wealth is through home ownership. But it's also important that we note that and understand the reason behind why we have such disparities. And a lot of this goes back to the early times. In most recent days locally, we were able to actually attend and experience what was called Undesign the Red Line Tour. And a number of community organizations, along with the Winston-Salem Foundation, they actually collaborated to bring this experience to the community. And if you take yourself back to the 1930s when redlining was implemented, we actually are creating the social safety net and wealth building programs of the New Deal. But Congress actually baked into these particular programs systemic ways to actually cut out people of color from benefiting. For example, with Social Security, they actually cut out two forms of labor, which were agriculture and domestic labor, because in the 1930s in the South, especially if you were Black, you were probably working in a domestic or agricultural labor. And redlining is how we actually bring Jim Crow into the structures of home ownership. Then we were actually inventing a 3-year mortgage. The federal government was insuring those home loans, and we were essentially creating the American dream of home ownership. But this opportunity was only for white families. And so redlining is basically where a series of maps that the federal government commissioned for 239 cities. And Winston-Salem was one of those cities. And those maps actually showed those areas that the government recommended were most prime for investment. And so those areas were green. And the other areas where money should not have been loaned to were red. And they varied in between. And so you essentially cut off investment in these whole red regions, starting with home loans, but eventually including things like business loans, insurance, and bank branch loans. And as a result, you actually had concentrated areas of poverty. And so in order for us to be able to level the playing field, we have to provide access to credit and home loans. At Financial Pathways, we actually have a program that's called the Center for Home Ownership. And what we do with that particular program is actually provide education, information, and resources so that individuals and families can overcome those barriers to home ownership. And most of those barriers are credit and debt. At our organization, we work really hard to help individuals to overcome those And as a result, we've been able to assist over 1,900 families to actually purchase homes. As a result of those homeowners, they actually returned to this community over $200,000 in tax revenue on an annual basis. And they have been able to generate over $343 million in wealth. It is programs like that that help individuals and families to, one, overcome those barriers to homeownership, help them to build wealth, help them to obtain assets, and also support them. We actually are working with North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, and we're also able to provide down payment assistance because we also see that that is a barrier to homeownership as well. Because again, you don't have your grandparents to be able to rely on for down payment assistance. You don't have your parents to be able to rely on for down payment assistance. So we need to be able to support our families in that particular way. In addition to that, the biggest issues that we're seeing now is that we're all experiencing what's called an affordable housing crisis, whether they are renting or owning their own homes. We have been able to develop a pool of qualified buyers by working with them to overcome their obstacles to home ownership. But the biggest issue that we have now is finding them homes that they can actually afford. Even with the layered financing and the down payment assistance that we have, we're still not able to get those potential homeowners into homes because, one, when we do see homes that come online that are affordable, they are being picked up by investors. Two, we have growing prices when it comes to the market rate of homes. And so we're just in this particular struggle right now where we have buyers that are ready, but we don't have homes that they are able to actually purchase. That's my question.
Yeah, thank you, Phyllis. Truly astonishing that something, like redlining that came out of the New Deal back in the 1930s is really just kind of suppressed multiple generations and kind of still part of the systemic fabric today, society, and then just access to credit. So we're gonna pivot a little bit here and let's talk a little bit about financial literacy. So Tiffany, my fellow money nerd, going back to that TIA Institute PFIN index where about 50% of Americans, 50% of U.S. adults answer 50% of the questions correctly. I'm sorry. We also, when we dig a little bit deeper there, we see huge disparities among racial and ethnic groups. So while whites and Asian Americans scored on the higher end of that scale, Black Americans and Hispanics each struggled to kind of get past 35%. So why do you think that is? And what can be done to correct that and close some of that gap?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for having me. Super excited to speak on this topic because I've done a ton of research. But I think it boils down to two things, right? So accessibility and representation. As you saw from the beginning poll questions, only 4 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies were Black Americans. And so if you take that and you look at it, because also my background's in HR too. So it's like, from a historical job perspective, we don't really hold many high-level positions. So if we don't hold many high-level positions, how can we have these conversations at the dinner table? How can we have these conversations with our friends and families? You pretty much don't know what you don't know. And so having accessibility to those jobs, to those opportunities has hindered us also in that way. And then also there's another part to accessibility too. We've already talked about the laws, we've already talked about the jobs and everything like that, but also thinking about something as simple as internet. Like you might be thinking, oh, well, there's plenty of information out there. People just need to research, blah, 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 blah. But that's also coming from a place of privilege, right? Because not everybody has internet. Not everybody has access to this information. And so that's another thing. So locally in Greensboro, actually starting next week, I'm doing in-person financial wellness classes because I realize that accessibility is also an issue, and I'm going to those communities that need it the most. Why? Because they might not have access to go to my blog or listen to my podcast or whatever the case may be. So accessibility is really two-pronged. Then we go over to representation. Now, I have been in HR and the personal finance field for a while, okay? And I will say both are mostly dominated by white individuals, and especially the finance field, right? So typically when you look at the average, what you think of when you talk about a financial advisor or whatever, it's a white old male, right? So, and not to offend anybody, but that's just real. It's usually white, older, and male. And so on the representation side, if we had more people in those positions that look like us, because if you look at the history, as we went through all of these polls and stuff, we haven't been done right by over the years. And so if we see someone that is a white male or white female or whomever, we might not trust that information as readily as anybody, as other demographics, right? And so having representation on that front would also help us be able to get more financially literate. And then also just having these conversations, right? A lot of times money is a taboo topic, and especially when you get into money and race and, all those types of things, a lot of people don't want to have these conversations. But if we don't, then we're just going to keep repeating the same history, repeating the same process. And so having these conversations are also important. So I just wanted to say accessibility and representation, there's so much I can talk about in regards to both of those things. But the important thing is, if you are someone of privilege, and which we all are, we're sitting here on internet right now, right? So if you are someone of privilege, just make sure that you are having these conversations with whomever you run across, and let them know about different things that are going on in the community. Like I said, I'm about to have in-person workshops in the Glenwood community in Greensboro. So say, you know what, I know someone that's actually doing something in person. You can go over there and take advantage of that. Support the Black and Brown creators. I just left a conference that was for personal finance influencers. Out of, I think it was 1,600 people there, only 100 or so were Black. And so that just goes to show you as well that even though there's not many of us in the grand scheme of things, there are a lot of us out here trying to get that information out. So please support us, make sure we can be able to spread our message. And that could be as simple as a like, a share, just letting someone know that it's out there. Most of my resources are free, and it's free for that reason, because I just want to educate my people. So that's a long and short answer of why I feel like this is the situation and what we can be doing to improve. Now, one more thing I want to hit on really quick. Use your white privilege. I mean, I'm just going to be real. Use your white privilege to make a difference. Be an ally, be a supporter. If you see something that's going on and you're like, you know what, that doesn't seem right, speak up, because that can help as well. I've seen that happen in corporate America, for instance, when I was in HR. There were directors that were white, were privileged, and they saw someone being taken advantage of. They're like, wait, that's not right. Let me speak up and let me make a difference in this person's life. And not only do you make a difference in that person's life, but you also help other people coming up the pipeline as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well, because I go ahead and say it. Please use your white privilege so that way you can make a difference. Go after laws. That's a big thing too. I went to an economic development panel up at Guilford College not too long ago. Laws are a big deal when it comes to this space. So if you have a voice, if you have a platform, let it be known what's going on, so that way more people can be on board. All right, I'm done.
Tiffany, thank you. Just, a real quick follow-up question for you, just on kind of on the topic of accessibility, as you said it. I've seen like a recent trend in the news of states enacting laws to encourage personal financial education in high school curriculums. And I know, coming from Boys and Girls Clubs of America, that was a big push in like after school activities too. Knowing that there might be, a few legislators or school board administrators or school administrators, how do you feel about personal financial education in the school curriculum, and how can we go about doing that?
Oh, highly, highly recommend it. Because like I said, accessibility, right? But all kids go to school, right? So that would be a perfect way to start introducing these concepts early on. So that way, when they become adults, I mean, we've all had to go through this for the most part, unless you had parents that were in finance. It's like you had to just struggle and figure it out, but it doesn't have to be like that. So I highly recommend that, we have personal finance in the classrooms. And I used to volunteer a lot with Junior Achievement. They try to do that, but they can't hit everybody. So it really needs to be a countywide, citywide, whoever's over, that. I know in Guilford County is the county, but it really needs to be a whole initiative. So that way schools aren't getting left out. I know with Junior Achievement, they can't hit everybody. So they've never been to my son's elementary school, which is a Title I school. They've never been there, but those kids need it, So I think in order for it to be accessible and be widespread, it needs to happen from, the school position. Now, it also gets into, because I heard this argument the other day, actually, who's supposed to teach it? Is it, is it the history teacher? Is it the reading, math teacher? And so there's other logistics that go along with it, but also there's people out here like me that would love to come to classrooms. So I think, there's different things that we can explore in order to get those concerns hammered out. But I think it absolutely needs to be a thing, and hit these kids early. So that way they don't have to struggle like we did.
Yeah, that's great, Tiffany. And I think that the question of who teaches it is really instrumental too. And, that's another opportunity for, volunteerism. Junior Achievement, I know, is a great organization, but, just even volunteering in the community through other youth service organizations is a great way to spread knowledge, that you do have. So, so let's look at then kind of, pivoting, right? You kind of hit on the financial services industry a little bit, Tiffany. So, and we've got some stats here to sort of back up, the old white man cliche that I'm here representing, right, of financial advisors. But women only account for 18% of the financial headcount, yet they account for more than 50% of the U.S. population. Blacks only account for 2.9% of advisors, despite being over 14% of the population. Likewise with Hispanics, 5.1% of advisors versus 18.4% of the population, right? So startling numbers there, and really just kind of confirming that message of, the old white man advisor. On top of that, right, we look at even the wage gap, right? I think the stats among the gender inequality is well known. Women earn 82 cents on the dollar for every dollar that a man makes. In the financial services industry, it's even worse. The female will earn in the financial services industry about $27 per hour versus $40 per hour for a male. You do the math, that comes out to about 65 cents on the dollar that women are earning compared to male counterparts. So Harli, as a female in the financial services industry, let's hear a little bit maybe about your experience, and then maybe what's Parsec Financial doing to encourage racial and gender diversity and create career paths for some of these underrepresented populations in the industry.
Thanks, Jed. So, there's a lot of things that you can do, and I will say that it's a journey, and this is not an overnight fix. We've been working both gender and racial diversity for many years, and there's a lot of work left to do. So I acknowledge that. Two things that we've done to try to improve racial diversity in the industry in general is recognizing, some of Tiffany, what you were saying is that this stuff starts early. And I think historically, a white male is much more likely to see the white male industry, financial industry, and say, that's for me, that's where I belong. So I'm going to go get a degree in finance. I'm going to go get an internship in finance. I'm going to go get my first job in finance. This applies to any corporation with a similar type of history, not just finance. But But women and people of color may be a lot less likely to say, hey, that's a place where I belong. So they may not take the educational path to get there. So we're trying to attract people at that early stage. And one thing that we've done is establish a diversity scholarship for the Certified Financial Planner designation, which is our primary designation in this financial advising industry that you want to get. You have to get it outside of your 4 years of college. So we've committed $100,000 to scholarships and hope that that should get us 16 scholarship applicants who can go on to get their CFP, because it's several $1,000s to do that. And then the other thing that we've done is our internship program is focused exclusively on diversity. And so we partnered with another financial organization to help us find diverse interns. And then last year, actually, we pulled from our scholarship recipient pool for interns. And while we recognize that those scholarship recipients and interns may not go on to work at Parsec, what we're doing is trying to improve the industry as a whole and get more people early on experience and qualified for work in this industry. So that's one thing that we've been doing. Another thing that I think is really important is when we do get diversity in our employee base, how do we help them promote their career? So I think it's really important not just to have, women and people of color, but to have them in leadership positions, management positions, and to have them in the highest levels of the organization. So I can speak to my experience as a woman and what we did and what I think has worked, and then trying to look at that and say, what did we do to help gender diversity that might translate to racial diversity in our industry? Because it's not the same, and not everything will work. But when I came to Parsec 19 years ago, all the financial advisors were men except for one woman, and everyone else was considered admin, kind of entry level, and they were all women, including myself. I came in as an assistant. And what we started working on was helping those women who were in our organization, including myself, who didn't necessarily have the educational background. I'm majored in English, but who had the aptitude, who had the intellect, and had the desire to move up in the company. And then we started supporting them. So we're going to train you how to do this job. We're going to let you sit in on these client meetings and learn what it's like. We're going to pay for your education. We're going to pay for your certification and give you time to do that. And so by encouraging women who did not come from that traditional finance education background and supporting their journey, and then creating career paths where there are steps along the way, because it's pretty intimidating, just to be thrown into a position you're not ready for. We have made just an enormous difference in our organization, where we have, we have more financial advisors who are women now, and we have a lot of women, almost the majority women, who are in these on this career path to be a financial advisor through these steps that we've taken. So I look back and I see the success there, but we have made a lot of improvements in hiring people of color into our firm, but I want to keep working on helping the same trajectory for those people to say, did you come into this industry with the appropriate education, or do you need additional resources because the history of the industry has not been supportive to people of color? And so we're looking at the same type of interventions of support, monetary, time, investment, and that sort of thing. So I just, these things don't happen by accident. I think that's the thing. They don't happen just because we said, we want to hire more people of color. We want to hire more women. Let's do that. It just isn't that easy. You have to put a lot of time and attention into it and be very intentional about it.
Yeah, great great message there as far as the intentionality and being deliberate, in it. We definitely do in this industry just have a huge disparity. And I think that drives, a little bit of some of the other issues as far as financial literacy as well. Tiffany, you spoke to this a little bit. And it's borne out some statistics. So Northwestern Mutual's 2021 Planning and Progress Study, according to this, U.S. adults say that financial advisors are their most trusted source for financial advice, right? And that's followed up very closely by themselves or another family member. And we can see that there's definitely a knowledge gap, right? Understanding the financial literacy outside of the industry. But also found that in the survey that 60% of respondents do not work with an advisor, right? That's a large population that is not served by professionals. And this is just I think a follow-up question for the group, because I think you can all speak to it. How do you think that lack of diversity in the financial advice profession, adversely impacts underrepresented populations, and their inclination actually to seek out advice from a professional as opposed to family members or social media, which is one of my favorite places now to get financial advice, except for your site, Tiff. I mean, you're a trained professional there, but talking about, TikTok, right? But how does that impact, right? People who might not see themselves, right, coming to the old white man for advice? How does that discourage them?
Yeah, I can go ahead and hop right in because, this is speaking my language. But, I kind of hit on that when I said representation matters, right? So I'm an accredited financial counselor, which means I help people with budgeting, debt payoff, goal setting, all the basic stuff. And I will say 85% of my clients look like me. And when I ask them, oh, how did you hear about me? Or why did you decide to go with me? It's because they looked like me, and they feel like it's a safe space. They feel comfortable talking to me about these topics. And so that's why I feel the lack of diversity adversely affects this. Now, there's another side too that's not really talked about as well. And that is a lot of people okay. So sometimes people go to advisors and they're like, oh, I need help. Now, first of all, that takes a lot of courage, right? So that takes a lot of courage. That takes a lot of, I'm actually going to seek out help. But then what happens is they don't have enough assets for the advisor to work with them. So now we have introduced financial trauma. They may have already gone through financial trauma. That's why they're reaching out now. But now on top of that, we've added additional trauma because they didn't get a call back. I've had a few people come to me and say, I tried to reach out for help before. I never got a call back, or I didn't have enough to work with. So now it's becoming a worth issue, right? So it's a lot of layers to that, but there's different things that can trigger why people don't reach out. And so, going back to representation, that's why it's important. But also, and that's one of my gripes with the industry is, a lot of advisors don't work with people without assets. If somebody is in the negatives or, as far as net worth is concerned, they don't have anything to invest, then who do they go to, right? So that's why I decided to get the AFC, the Accredited Financial Counselor, because I work with people that have negative, zero, low net worth and try to get them up to the point to where they can work with an advisor, because sometimes that's a barrier as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tiff. As somebody in the industry, right, I recognize that. And even coming from outside of the industry, I was, when I first started my career search, I had no idea about the different types of advisors that are out there. And you can very easily end up in the absolute wrong place, depending on what type of advice you're looking for. So I think the positive news is there are a lot of fixed fee advisors popping up. There's a lot of people like yourself who are recognizing that, people of all asset levels, all colors, all types needs access to financial advice or just need a question answered. And we can do that for, a reasonable fee, right? You don't have to be a ultra wealthy individual to get access to quality unbiased financial advice. So kudos to you for spearheading that as well.
I also like to add to that question. I think that Tiffany is correct. Even in our industry, at Financial Pathways of the Piedmont, we also are, certified credit and housing counselors. And in our work, we really truly feel that those that are closest to the problems are also closest to the solution. And being able to come in with lived experience, our counselors are able to make a stronger impact in the clients that we serve. When clients come in and they're in crisis, they are looking for trust. They're also looking for comfort, and they're looking for sound advice. And when you are dealing with people of color, it is very important that when they walk into an office, they see someone that looks like them. That all brings down the distrust, that allows us to be able to really sit down with them and to be able to, see what their situation is, develop an action plan to move them along. But it's also important when we're working with clients, when we get them out of crisis, what we see is that we need to go back and provide a foundation, and that's where the financial education comes in. When people come in, they have not had the skills oftentimes that, would allow them to be able to work through their particular issue, through their particular problem. And, that's really what we are, here to do, to ensure that they are getting the correct advice that they can get, that when they purchase a home, they're getting the best deal that they could possibly get. And that we're also making sure that there's no financial exploitation, that they are secure in, providing, building their assets, and that they also have just that trust. And, if we were not able to provide that, then we would not be able to, have the impact that we have, in their lives. And so that counseling, that coaching, and also helping them to just improve their financial well-being is so important. And to have someone to be able to walk into an office where someone looks like them is very important as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Phyllis. And I'm just taking a peek here at the Q&A, and it looks like we do have a question that came in, maybe from a fellow advisor, Rashanir. I apologize if I butchered your name, but the question here is, how do you source people of color for your teams? And I think, for Phyllis and Harli, I think that's an important aspect. And, I think Harli, you touched on it a little bit, but maybe elaborating a little more. And Phyllis, how do you find people that, look like your clientele, so that you create that safe space, for them to feel well cared for?
Well, I can't say that I've cracked the code on that one. Everybody, I think, in the financial, or a lot of companies in the financial industry, are now recognizing how important and valuable it is to have a more diverse employee base, because the world is a diverse place, and our clients are diverse, and wanting to have that representation. So I think, as I was saying, ours is the long game. It's how do we get a more diverse industry in general, but also we have, I think companies can work with a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant who's very knowledgeable and trained in the matter, to come in and look at their website materials, their job descriptions, their job postings, where they're posting for jobs, and not just, I think part of the problem is when you're a white person, or a white male in particular, and you're seeing the world through your lens, and then you're trying to hire through your lens, and you don't even realize you're hiring through your lens, and you don't even realize that you're going to the same venues where you would look for a job, and you are posting things in the same manner that you would expect to see. And so by having an outside consultant come in and provide that valuable wisdom and resources can go a long way in just shifting your hiring process a little bit.
Phyllis, anything to add to that one as you think about kind of the hiring process?
I think that, the agency has been very fortunate in that we have really had great diversity within our organization. There hasn't been anything that we've done in particular that has, allowed us to have that diversity. Being a woman of color that actually leads an organization, I understand the importance of that. And in our interview process, our hiring process, we've just been fortunate enough to be able to have people that want to be able to be in this industry and in this particular space and be able to, have an impact in the lives of the clients that we serve.
Fantastic. Thank you, Phyllis. And I think we did have another question, or more of just kind of a comment that was a follow-up from something that Tiffany said. But as far as someone who used to work in the financial services industry and they saw the difference between white men and their clients and hers, they would have the same licenses, same education. However, when they spoke, it wasn't taken with, I'll say, as much gravity or as much seriousness to a client, and they would go with, the white advisor. So, Tiffany, what say you to that in that experience for you?
Yeah, this is very real. And the reason it's real is because we have implicit bias, right? And there's a study, it's a quiz out there. It's an implicit bias study. Just Google it, it'll pop up. But it's very eye-opening. I've taken it a couple of times. And me, as a person that's very pro-Black, it even said that I had an implicit bias. And so you'll be surprised what your results may be. And with that quiz, it has a whole bunch of different ones, and it looks at race, it looks at gender, it looks at sexuality, all types of stuff. But that's very real. And it's because of, our society, right? So if society is hammering into us that, this is like, oh, thank you, Jared. See you on it. But if society is hammering into us that this is the grand standard of knowledge and information, then implicitly we're like, oh, we place those people on a higher pedestal. And that could be subconsciously, So to get around that, I recommend taking the quiz, seeing what you get, and just being aware of what implicit biases you have. Because like I said, it goes over all types of things. There's different quizzes for each one. And just be aware of the implicit biases that you carry around as an individual, so you could be more aware of where you're placing, subconsciously how you're interacting with people. And so anyway, that's my spiel on that, because it's very real. I've had it happen to me multiple times throughout my career, and it's all because of implicit bias, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that, Tiffany. I've taken it too, and as someone who thought as the most non-racist, non-stereotypical person out there, I mean, implicit bias is real. And it's just shaped by society. So, it's one of those underlying systemic issues that is out there.
But awareness is how you get around it.
Yes. So I'm reading some questions as we come in, and I think I'm gonna hit kind of one. Phyllis, you and I were talking a little bit before this, and you dropped an eye-opening statistic to me that I was familiar with, but I didn't realize it was this dramatic. So you had mentioned that 80% of all health outcomes are influenced now by non-clinical factors, right? Things such as access to quality and affordable housing, reliable transportation, nutritious food, financial stability. Again, one of these things that contributes to the equity gap also contributes now to a health gap. So talk to us a little bit more about that in what you see, and how this is showing up, maybe specifically even in Winston-Salem.
Yes, I think that the social determinants of health is something that we all are unpacking and understanding as we go. But as you can imagine, when you are feeling the stress of your finances, when there's not enough food, when there's, transportation issues, when you're dealing with childcare issues as well, all those things ultimately affect your health. And, we know that finances is a #1 stressor. It's also the cause of divorce. It's the cause of children not doing well in school. There are so many things that trickle down to when you are not financially well. It impacts your health. And so, we are, have been a part of many organizations that are really trying to address that. So if you go into a doctor's office and, they're doing the questionnaire and they're asking you many questions about how you are actually living. They're asking you, do you have enough food to go to the next month? Are you concerned about your housing? And when they are able to answer some of those questions, then they can make the referral to our organization as a result of that. And we're seeing clients that have been seen by their physician that have indicated that, hey, my finances are, a stressor. And there have also been studies that say, high blood pressure is directly connected to your finances as well. And we know that high blood pressure is one of those things that impact African Americans more than anyone. And so you see this, and these things are aligned with one another. And if we can help to address the financial part, then we can, of course, help to, increase or decrease their blood pressure in a lot of cases, and really help in terms of those social determinants of health. It is, true and factual.
Yeah, that's great, Phyllis. I think it's an eye-opening statistic to me. And, just seeing that access, to wealth, or the inequality in wealth can actually drive health outcomes as well, is, it becomes less about wallet, then it becomes more of a, kind of a life and death, situation. So, I think as we get near the top of the hour, I think we got time maybe for one more question here. And Phyllis, this is directed towards you. So what programs are available to persons who are, barely middle class, right? Too much income for government assistance, but not enough for income for comfortable living, savings, things like that. And we can open that up to the entire panel if anyone else has any answer for that as well too.
Well, I think that in terms of, programs, Financial Pathways of the Piedmont is one of those organizations that's able to assist in that particular regard. We are able to connect individuals with the resources that are available in our community in terms of housing, in terms of, trying to save and coaching individuals through that particular process. You always are in that situation where you have those that are in the middle income, but I see that there are programs that are now, sort of stretching those income limits as well, such as with the down payment assistance program, the Community Partners Loan Pool program. For a family of 4, that income is about $61,000. And 80% of the area median income, we're looking at that all the time and really trying to see how we can make those adjustments. But it is more difficult for those that are, in that middle class, that they're just there, just making barely enough, and they don't qualify for certain programs, and they make too much money, to benefit from others. So it's a difficult position to be in.
And I know that's a comment. Oh, go ahead, Tiff. Sorry,
I was just going to add, so I just found out when I was at the conference I just left that there is a show about to come out on PBS called Opportunity Knocks. Now, I'm not telling you, like, the show is probably amazing, but on the website, they have a wonderful resource where you can search for CDFIs in your community. And those are community development organizations that can help with people that are in that middle ground. So I highly recommend, I was trying to find the website while we were speaking, but look up Community Knocks. That's coming up on PBS. And on their website, they have a search function where you can look at different cities, states, what have you, and get in contact with those resources as well. I found out about it and I'm like, oh, I want to spread the word because that's good information. And that's the only place I know where they are building a directory of those resources. So
great. Thank you, Tiff, for that addition there. Before you run out of time, I want to give everybody on the panel just, quick opportunity If people want to follow up with you directly or find out more about your organizations, drop a website. You want to give everybody your email address. You've got your inbox under that much control, or a website, social media, anything like that. So go ahead, Phyllis.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was typing it in.
Oh. financialtask.org is the website, and they can give us a call at the office at 336-896-1191. Great. And maybe we can follow up with an email on some of that contact information as well too. But Tiffany, go ahead.
Yeah, so you can find me Money Talk with Tiff. It's a blog, it's a podcast. If you listen to podcasts, definitely check out the podcast. I interview people from all over the world on ways that they make, save, invest in whatever they do with their money. And the reason I do that is because the way out of poverty is ideas, right? So like we've been discussing, you don't know what you don't know. So if you listen and you hear someone doing something that you might think, oh, I might have a passion in that too. Now you know that it's possible that you can make money doing it. So that's what the podcast is about, but it's moneytalkwitht.com is where you can find me, and then all over social media at Money Talk with T. And I do answer all of my DMs. So definitely reach out, and I'm here to help.
All right. And Harli?
Our website is parsecfinancial.com, PARSEC. And you can contact us on there as well. But if anybody in any management, leadership, or hiring position in corporations or businesses wants to bend my ear, brainstorm with me, give me ideas, share your best practices, I'm happy to hear from you about doing a better job at improving the diversity in our industry. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, Tiffany, Phyllis, Harli, you guys are truly an impressive group. I appreciate y'all letting me, the white guy here, kind of, take a small part in this event. All the leadership Winston staff that were behind the scenes, thank you guys for all of your help today in keeping this running smoothly. And thank you all for who spent your lunch hours with us too and tuned in. I think it was a really great conversation about, wealth inequality and closing that wealth gap. And I'll kick it back to you, Catherine, because I know you always got a commercial and a plug for Leadership Winston. So
Maybe. Thank you, Judd. I'd like to thank all of the panelists today for their time and their expertise and input on the content that we talked about today. I'd like to thank again Parsec Financial for their sponsorship of Leaders in Lunch. To all of our participants who are still on the call, we do a Leaders in Lunch every month, so please keep your eyes peeled on your email inboxes where we will be sending you updates on what content topics are coming up. For everybody that wanted to know more about the questions that might not have been answered today, we will be sending out a copy of this recording to everybody that's registered. And in addition to that, we will be sending the answers to the questions that did not get asked and the bio information for each of our panelists today. So my thanks to each of you for joining us. If you have any questions or concerns or ideas for what topics you would like to see us discuss for future webinars, please reach out to me at kp@leadershipws.org. Thank you guys so much.